All right. Well, we're going to be covering a little bit about Ansible today, but probably the biggest thing is Ansible is one of several tools that are out there that are really helpful for managing machine configurations, and just running and rerunning things over and over and over, and only applying the changes that you want to apply. Years ago, not years ago, but at my previous job, I was tasked with managing a lot of different servers. And, coming from a development world and a Ruby world, it was very much a learning curve experience for me, where I just used the tools that I knew. I basically built everything that I needed to do from scratch to manage this fleet of servers and handle automated deployments and zero downtime and all this other stuff. And I just kind of hammered through it myself, and it was a pain. And so whenever I got to my current job with dmarcian, we needed to do the same thing there. They had manually set up all of the infrastructure at the time, and we needed to have some sort of tool in place. And I decided I wasn't going to go back and rebuild all that stuff. I wasn't going to try to modify my existing code. I wanted to take an existing tool set and just apply and just do it the right way from the start. And so I researched a lot of the different options that were out there: Puppet, Chef, CF Engine, Salt, and Ansible. And eventually, after looking at all the trade-offs, I settled on Ansible. And the biggest reason that I settled on Ansible was that Ansible is extremely capable, extremely simple, and it doesn't require an agent to run. An agent being something you have to install on the other machines that's going to then pull in your configuration. It just works over SSH, just connects to the machine, and then acts just like you would from the command line. You can tell it, switch to this user, run this command, switch to this directory, run this. It captures the output, and it's very easy to wrap your mind around. But before I was going to start working with it on these various systems and their various production systems, I wanted to play with it a lot. And so I just switched to a Mac laptop after a decade or so or I just switched to an Ubuntu laptop after about a decade or so on OS X. And in the process of doing that, you end up trying out a lot of different distros. I tried Ubuntu, I tried Fedora, I tried Mint, and I found myself reproducing the exact same set of steps on every one of these distros to get my machine set back up. And so I started wondering, I'm running Linux here. I wonder if I can use Ansible to configure my personal laptop. And it turns out, yes, you can. And there's a lot of people who do it. And it's because all I really wanted was a good, simple way that I could learn Ansible, that I could play with it, that I could work through it on something that mattered, rather than just some random test server that I was setting up to say, oh, let's try this thing that I'm never going to use just for sake of trying it. And instead, I got to use it on something I was actually going to use it on. And now it's pretty cool because I can take this set of skills and these set of playbooks that I've got here, and I can apply them to any Linux distribution that I decide to switch to. I can just make some modifications and I can run it, and boom, in no time at all, my entire machine is configured to my needs and preferences. And so that's how we got here. So, short version. Going to end up skipping over some slides. Sorry, I've given this presentation a couple times, and I don't always go with the flow of it. But so yeah, needed some repetition. And I'm not the pioneer here by any means. There's lots of examples that are out there in terms of in terms of how to do this. I read through some of the other articles that were out there, kind of used them as my getting started point, and they'll run you through a lot of the basic setup. But for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. It's a couple of configuration files, and instead of giving it a host of saying point to this other remote machine, you just tell it to point to localhost, and then it runs on your local command line. It's just that simple. And then everything else just works the same way. So absolute basics of Ansible is it connects over SSH to any number of machines. You can control how many it connects to at the same time, what order it does, if it's going to do it in some type of tiered sequence where it runs on one machine first, and then after success, it runs on 2 machines, and after success there, it runs on 4, and just kind of increases based on success. So you can do a tiered rollout and roll back if you find a problem. But at its most basic level, it's just connecting to another machine and running commands over SSH, period. It's based on Python, which is available on just about every Nix distribution by default. So there's nothing to install on the other machines once you get there. You just have to have a login. And all it does is it takes a lot of commands that are structured as YAML files. It sends these commands over the wire, and then on the other side, it converts those commands to Python to run on the machine. That's how it's Python based. It's just running that way. And the most helpful thing about this is, even though you're running command line and just simple shell scripts, really, you'd think, why don't I just write a shell script for this in whatever my favorite language is? What's the benefit of using something like Ansible? And I can just do that myself. And the biggest thing is that the tasks that you get with Ansible, the entire purpose of their structure is that all the modules are built to know if the command that you're trying to run has already completed successfully. And if it has, it won't run it again. So it will only run the changes as long as it can identify them. And so you can do custom things, and you can tell it how to identify if those things have changed, or you can use pre-existing modules for different behaviors and not have to worry about all that, because it already knows how to tell all the different minute changes that you might make. If you say, I want to change this line in a file, and you use one of the modules that lets you change specific lines of files or look for a specific thing to change in a file, if it's already at what the end result would be, it won't change it. And that right there is the example of about all you really have to do to set Ansible to run on your local machine. You add a little ansible.cfg file that tells it where in your local directory where you're running Ansible from. You tell it where to find your inventory of machines, your host file, and in that host file, you tell it to connect to localhost, and you're done. Pretty straightforward. So here's a simple example of a task. Can you all see my mouse pointer? Can you see my mouse pointer in Columbia?
Yeah, we can see it.
Cool. Okay. I want to make sure. All right. So bring this back then so I can walk through it. So this is a very simple example of a task with Ansible. So all you'd have is a YAML file that included this inside of it. You have the name of the task, you have the module, and then you have arguments to that module. And so this is the task name, which can be anything. And so I'm just going to call it install Ansible enter. I'm using pip to install a module with Python. And then I'm just telling it install Ansible lint. So that's the module that I want to install. And that will fire up the pip module and install that. It knows if it's already installed. It knows how to check. It knows where to go get it from. And that's it. Pretty clean, pretty straightforward, right? Simple enough. Now, I also want to clarify, I haven't updated this presentation in a little while, and the argument structure has changed a little bit. So whenever I first did this, if you were doing a loop, there were all these loop structures within it. So you'd say with items, or you'd say with array. And these different types of data structures each had their own with clause that would essentially let you loop through them. And so this right here is an example where you'd say, I'm going to run this package. I want to install an item. I want to make sure that it is present. And I'm going to run through these 3 packages. And it's going to run this thing with each one of these with items. Now, before there was multiple different structures to do all your different loop types. Now there's not. Now there's a single central structure, and you just modify that loop structure. And so if you go in and decide to tinker with Ansible later, highly advise you just go and look up the new loop structure, and everything will be a lot simpler for you. But so state is one of the major things that you'll see. And usually if you're saying, I want to use this package to act on this item argument, and then I want to make sure that it exists in whatever the state might be. And so the state means when it's going through and it's checking for it, it's going to see if it's already in the state that you asked it to be in. And if it is, it's not going to do anything. If you wanted to delete something, you would say, I want the state to be absent. And you won't, and that'll carry across lots and lots of different types of packages. So whether you're looking at installing packages or installing files or removing files, that's how you would act on all of it. If you wanted to remove any of them, you would use that depending on whatever the module was. But absent and present are consistent across a lot of different modules within Ansible. There are also other states. So if you're dealing with something like a web server, you can say state restarted or state reloaded, or state stopped, that kind of thing. So a very basic playbook is just a set of tasks. So the tasks were a YAML file, and you can put multiple tasks in order in a given YAML file. So that simple thing that I showed you before, you can include more and more things in a giant file, and it'll just run through those things in order, just like we talked about. But you can also set up a playbook that has different types, and you can say, I'm going to build this playbook that consists of these different tasks that I have from different locations, and I'm going to say point this at these machines. And so in this, I've just got it pointed to host localhost at the top there, and then I can, if you start breaking your tasks up into smaller YAML files, you can break them up and say, all right, this is my task to install Postgres on a system. This is my task to install Nginx. And then you can just say, all right, include the Nginx task, include the Postgres task, and you just layer them in there. It's just simple little includes that are on here. And so from a playbook level, there are a few consistent types of arguments. So you got host, which is the target system that you're pointing to. You can also point it to a list of hosts, and there's all sorts of different things you can do with naming if you're going remote. We're just talking about local right here.
Is the list comma separated, space separated?
Oh gosh, I don't even remember off the top of my head. I haven't been doing it in a while. We have an ops guy for this stuff now. No, seriously, we do. He knows me. He's awesome. But so I know you can name them and reference them in another file. You can do patterns, like you can do host name with, I think, my bracket 1 through 10, and it'll run through those lists as well.
You don't command line. You pass it as an argument from you run the playbook. You can do a concept.
But so when you're breaking down the playbook, you have handlers, pre-task, task, and roles. And so we'll talk about what each one of these is, but the high-level version of each one of these things is tasks are exactly what we talked about. You're just including a YAML file that has tasks, like we looked at before. Pre-tasks just helps to define the order, because when you're looking at the order of these things, if you were to run a playbook right here, it would actually run the roles first, unless you have pre-tasks. So it'll run pre-tasks, roles, tasks, and then handlers. So the definitions of these three types of things, pre-task and tasks are the same thing. Roles are basically packaged playbooks that you can go and download from places, from Ansible Galaxy. It's basically a place for people to share these different playbooks. Because if you find that you're needing to write a bunch of things from scratch, or there's something that's not already built into Ansible, odds are really good, unless you're building it for something that you are personally inventing yourself, a playbook already exists for it. And so if you're doing something like, I'll stick with Postgres as my example. If you were wanting to install Postgres, there is a playbook out there for it. You download the role, and then you say, I want to install the role Postgres, and it has all of the options that you would want to configure, and it will install it with all those options. Then if you run it again, if you just change an option, it'll just change the one option you modified. And roles are extremely helpful for your local machine. Like there's roles for installing Google Chrome. There's roles for installing Firefox. There's roles for installing just about every local. And there's a Slack role, I believe, out there. I mean, you can find roles to do just about everything. And they're all open source. And so if you're wondering how did they do that, you can just go look on GitHub and find out how they did it. And it's a really helpful way to learn also. if you're curious about some of these things. Handlers are basically triggers to run after tasks complete. So say you do a bunch of modifications to your web server. You're modifying Apache, and you're doing a bunch of changes to different configuration files. You're adding new virtual hosts or something like that. And then after, if any one of those things changed, you would tell it, restart Apache or reload Apache. And what the handlers do is they roll all of those up. So behind the scenes, Ansible knows not to be repetitive in its behavior. So if you are, for example, installing a list of packages, it's not going to go and one-off install each one of those things. It's going to check and see what's there, and then it's going to install them all in one fell swoop. So even though it looks like a repetitive loop, it's going to minimize the surface area. Same thing with handlers. If you've run a task that's going to trigger an Apache restart 50 different times, you send those restarts to a handler. You put a task in a handler that says restart Apache, and then you tell it to trigger a handler called restart Apache. Unless something has changed, Apache won't restart. If one of those things has changed, or if 50 of them has changed, Apache will only restart one time at the very end of all of them. And that's how you use handlers. So this is a very basic handler. We're just saying restart Postgres, service name, state, restarted. And then at the end of a task, you would say notify, restart Postgres. That's all there is to calling a handler.
So notify goes in the
task.
That's separate from this file.
Yeah. So
This is two files or so.
Yeah. So this is what this would be in the handler file, where you would define your handler behaviors.
That's one file.
Yeah. And then from any of the tasks that are there, you would call.
Many different Postgres changes I need to do.
Yep. And you can define different handlers and include different handlers with different playbooks and whatever else. I mean, they're not globally defined. You can just say, I'm only going to need these for this. I'm only going to include these handlers. And it only happens if the task runs. So like we said, if nothing changes, it's not going to rerun the handler. And so one of the example that I'm going to kind of go through here is I'm a big fan of Proton VPN. And Proton VPN provides you with a lot of different VPN files, over 150 different VPN files. And I wanted to automatically load those files on my machine so that I could not have to go through and manually log into every one of them. I just wanted to run my playbook, have it go ahead and set the password right there, and then just be able to pick it from a drop-down menu and turn it on wherever it was. And so there was a lot to do with that, and I ended up being able to automate it thanks to this. And so we'll get into that example in just a little bit. But we talked about Ansible Galaxy. That's the Ansible Galaxy website. You can find them for anything. Ansible doesn't just run on Linux. You can run it on OS X. I mean, there's modules there to install Homebrew. I mean, you can run it on, if you've got a command line and file system, you can run it. You can even run Ansible on Windows. I mean, as long as you've got Python there, it'll run. I haven't ever tried to do it before, but there's a lot of information out there that says you can. And so for the roles that we talked about that you get from Ansible Galaxy, you can specify a requirements file. And all that is a simple file where you're just defining your different roles that are over here. And then you run this one command, say Ansible Galaxy install requirements, and it will go and download all of those roles for you from Ansible Galaxy. So this is one that comes in handy. Is anyone in here familiar with ASDF?
Is that the one that switches from multiple rack to query?
Yep. ASDF is it's a code versioning tool. So with different programming languages that you use, there's like a RVM, Ruby Version Manager, NVM, Node Version Manager, and just about every language has their own specific version manager program where you can install multiple versions of the same language on your machine, and you can switch from directory to directory and change the version that happens to be running in the directory that you're in. And so you can install lots of different versions. You can install libraries for the different versions, and these things help to manage it. ASDF got sick of having tons of different ones and made one big one where you can install tons of languages in it at one time. And so this is just an example of the ASDF role. You tell it which user to run ASDFs, and then tell it to install these plugins. So these are just some of the arguments for the role. So I'm going to install Ruby, Erlang, Elixir, and Go with these various versions, and then I'm going to set the global version on my machine to be those. And all those languages will get installed. Another one, the Atom editor. I don't know how familiar y'all are with that, but Atom has tons and tons of different packages that are within it also. And so installing Atom and then going and reinstalling all the packages that came with it can be kind of a pain. But with the Atom role, you can set up Atom, and you can actually do different configurations for different users also. You tell it where your config's going to live, tell it which packages to install. I mean, you can get really, really extensive with Atom. This is just a small snapshot. But lots of these modules are very, very complete. And the more users they have, odds are the more complete they are in terms of the flexibility that they give you and the control that they give you. And I mean, one of the great perks of Linux is that everything is a file. And so odds are is if you have access to get to the file, read it, and write to it, you can do just about anything that you want on the machine in an automated fashion, which is awesome. But even if you didn't want to do that, you can just write your own task yourself too, because tasks aren't that hard to write. And so here's, I wanted to install NeoVim, and there wasn't a library out there for NeoVim. So we just created one. So we go add the apt repository for the PPA, and that'll add the PPA for it. Tell it state present, tell it update the cache. That just does an apt update after you've added it to that. Then you just do an apt install. And there is a more generic abstraction. You don't have to do specifically apt. There's actually a library called package, where you can just do a generic package manager, and you can specify a library, and it'll work whether you have apt or yum or whatever else on your machine. But the individual ones are still there in case you need to call out to some specific functionality of that particular package manager. If you need to do something special for the type of machine you're on, you can do that.
So why did you choose to use apt instead of using package?
Well, at that one, because I was installing a PPA. And I wasn't sure if any of the other ones actually would let you install a PPA or do. I wasn't sure what the equivalent of that would be.
Okay, so you got apt repository. Gotcha.
Yeah, so here I'm using apt repository to install the PPA repo for NeoVim.
The next one you could change that to package.
I could, yes, absolutely could. Oh, and then down here we also run the command to set NeoVim as the default editor.
So how does it handle if a package is named differently from one distribution to another for different package managers?
That is a good question, and I have no idea.
Okay.
So I would like to tell you I did, but I haven't gotten into having to do that. So odds are, I mean, that would probably be up to you to handle if you knew it was named differently from repo to repo. It'd be up to you to handle it. But we've got them for apt, yum, DNF, pacman, zipper, and brew. And there's also there's a win package module as well that you're not supposed to use package with it. You're supposed to go direct to that one. And granted, I also have not tried from package to see if you can do specific call outs to other package managers. But it is fun to play. So this is what we were talking about with Proton VPN. So I've got a little, and I'll show you all after, but I've got a little drop-down menu over here. One second. Just realized. Oh, okay. I've got a little drop-down menu in the upper right corner where if you, and this is just how it works on Ubuntu, but if you install a VPN, then when you look at your upper right corner drop-down menu, you'll have that VPN there as an option. And you'll see something kind of similar to this. This is the actual network tab, but you'll see something kind of similar to this where you can just click on the switch and turn on the VPN. But the first time that you log into a VPN, you have to enter your password for the VPN. And so what I wanted to do, since I use Proton VPN and I have this giant repo of 150 TCP and 150 UDP VPN connections, I didn't want to go through and manually pick out and install each type of VPN that I wanted. I was about to travel to Europe, and I wanted to have one for Canada. I wanted to have one for the US. I wanted to have one for the UK. That's all I cared about. I didn't want to dig through them all. I didn't want to install them all. I didn't want to have to go in and then click on each one of them and type the password in over and over and over again, especially depending on how many I wanted. And so I decided to hammer through this and figure out how to do it. So here's what was involved. And something to keep in mind here before we do this is that all that you have to do in order to make an Ansible playbook or define these sets of tasks is just write down the commands that you had to do and what you did. Whenever you're walking through like the various Linux tutorials that are out there, and you find something that says do this command, then this command, then this command, and you're going through and you're probably copy and pasting or whatever else, just put them in a file, because since this is just command line stuff, almost every one of those will translate really cleanly to this. And you can almost go line by line and just convert them over. Like I had to do this on this step, I have to do this on this step. Simple as that. And so to start with, we went ahead and installed the packages that we needed. We needed to have OpenVPN, we needed the Network Manager, we needed GNOME's Network Manager plugin, we needed EasyRSA, Dialog, wget, Resolve configuration, and systemd resolve. And we also needed the Python pexpect module, because Ansible will let you use that if you want to work with an interactive dialog. So if you're working with like a shell script that prompts you and says, I need, select one of these options, or it just prompts you for standard input, pexpect will let you pattern match on whatever the question is and say, if you get something that matches this, give it this answer. And you can just walk through those little dialogues like that. And so we had to do all of that for this. And so first off, we fired up Git and went and cloned the Git repo. You tell it where to clone it to. That's it. You just give it the repo address, tell it which user to do this as, and then there's a Git module, and you can just clone the repo from there. Then we're going to run the Proton VPN installer, which is just a shell script. And shell scripts are fun because it's not an easy way to really define whether or not it is run. And so it's up to you on how specific you want to make it. But there's a really simple built-in function that you can do called creates. And all that creates does is it says, if this file exists, this command has been run. And so if your script outputs a certain file on success, it has been run. And so the quick and dirty, easy way to do this is to just pipe your output to a log file. And if that log file exists, it's run. It's not going to be 100% true all the time, but it's a quick and dirty solution.
So don't run it again.
Yeah. And so if I run this and it sees that install logs there, it knows that it's done. Now, if I wanted to, we could get more specific and I could check for success and failure and all that stuff. But I decided to just go the quick and dirty route. So you could do a success one or whatever else too. And so all I'm doing is I'm telling it change directory. Change directory and this directory for my user, and then run this shell script. So next up, I got some glare here. So next up, we had to automate the dialog for the installer. And so you tell it to run a command, the Proton VPN CLI init command, and that is going to run you through the installer dialog. And so this pexpect, we're using the expect module here, has a timeout of if it's given a response or if it hasn't given a response to keep your machine from locking up. After 10 seconds, it'll just stop if it was not getting what it was expecting. But then you just put off a list of responses, and you can use a little regular expression here. It says if it finds a prompt that includes fresh configuration, say yes. If it asks for the username, give it the username. If it asks for the password, give it the password. I'll talk about that in a minute. If there's a particular DNS server that you want to use, you can specify that. But that's pretty much it. Pretty straightforward. You just say you don't have to have the exact full sentence. You just have to have, I know this is going to uniquely be in this prompt. If you find this, answer it. They don't have to be in a particular order or anything.
What is paren question mark I?
Oh, it's just part of the regex for the first part of the sentence. Any text before that, and if you find this.
So what does the I mean?
Oh gosh, I don't remember. I can't do regexes without looking at a reference chart. I forget it after
I know
use it.
regexes, and I don't know what that is.
Well, might have been part of the p-expect. So yeah, you might need to just look up the p-expect. So fire that up real quick. Look at Ansible expect module. Because I'm pretty sure I was just going through following the examples that were on here when I was coming to it. But it works, and it worked over and over and over again.
Okay.
All right. So after that, I had to use all the I had to actually pull in all the VPNs, and so I didn't take it as far as actually having this thing log in to the Proton VPN website and go and find the VPNs and download them. I had already downloaded them. I had them on my machine somewhere, and so one of the fun things, and one of the reasons that I love not having a Mac anymore, is that this laptop is basically a portable server. I can't plug it in on airplanes; it uses that much power. But it has can hold up to 3 hard drives, and on one of those hard drives, I keep backups of everything, including my various playbooks and other files from things that I want to reinstall. So this stuff is all tailored to me. It all assumes that I have a drive over here with all of my pre-configured things that I may need to load back up, so I didn't have to install them somewhere else. You could put those anywhere that you wanted to, but I just happen to have them here. So I had the VPNs in a directory locally, and so all I did was I took those files, and there's a synchronize module that just runs rsync, and then I rsynced them up to the directory that I wanted all of them to live in. Then we went through and we found which ones that we wanted, and we renamed them and moved them to where I wanted them to live. So we did a simple copy, found the file path, made sure that this directory existed. Then we came down here and we defined how to split up the name, because the VPN files were really, really long. I didn't want the entire giant long VPN file to be my VPN name, because whenever you install the profile, it actually names the VPN whatever the file was. And so I just broke it up and had it, on some syntax based on TCP or UDP, with like a T or a U icon, and then the country of origin, the country of destination, because it lets you relay through, because Proton's fun like that. And that was just it. And so I just renamed it from that. And then I use this register here to store the results of the task that I'm on. And so registering basically just stores the output of the task that you're on in a variable that you can then reference in future tasks. So you can pass it along to the next task, rather than having to go and find it on the file system somewhere. And so we use this file glob syntax to actually look through it. And so we had the TCP directory, we had the secure VPN type, and then we were just looking for anything with the US flag in it, Canadian flag or the UK flag, and finding those file patterns. And you can specify patterns in a bunch of different ways, but that was all I needed here. And so next up, and remember we had this import VPNs was the output of that. So all the files that were matched and got changed here, we have the output of it there. And these won't just be like raw text; they'll be actual variables with attributes on them and everything. So you can have lots of different attributes depending on what you're getting out. So when you want to go through and install the actual OpenVPN profiles, we need to run this command to import the connection in the Network Manager using the Network Manager CLI here. And keep in mind, I didn't know any of this stuff when I started out. Just a whole lot of Googling. But this whole thing was done within about 2 hours. So we give it the item destination, which came from with items import VPNs dot results. So that was all the results from the previous connection. And so we went through, we created it, found those files, and we ran the command. And then we told it to reload the Network Manager CLI afterwards, because if you don't do that, then your interface doesn't actually register that new VPNs have been installed. You have to do that so that when you go and check your drop down, that the things you just installed will appear.
So you just run a handler for that.
Yep.
Reload.
Yeah, and the reload's just a simple shell script of go reload the service. So when it came to passwords and configuration, we didn't want to we had the raw VPN files. The raw VPN files don't have anything about your actual username or your password or anything like that. And so we had to figure out how to set it. And so all I did to figure it out was I looked at one of the raw files, and then I logged into one of them directly, and then I looked at the file after I logged into it directly, and I diffed it to see what I needed to add to it. And, so passwords in those files are not encrypted, but it's root read access only. So you at least have that going for you. But so all we had to do was I created a new task in there to actually set the configuration. It's a variables attribute where you can put a lot of nesting down here to do just about anything you want with it. And we used the INI file module. INI file module is extremely useful for various types of configuration files. It handles the nested INI files or just the raw value equals whatever styles of files. And rather than having to go through and do find replace on specific lines, you just tell it the arguments. If it finds them, it changes them. If it doesn't find them, it adds them. And you can specify where those things should go or what section or whatever else. And so you'll see down here, item 1, item 2, item 3, in terms of section, option, value, section, option, value, section, option, value, section, option, value. And that was it. And so we had our username and password set that was set elsewhere. And it runs through. And again, with the there were different types of loop attributes on here when I first started doing this. It's more cleaned up now. I still need to go and update these. But at the time, I had to use the with nested on here. And so we would go through the list of files from the previous set that we set in the last thing. So we had all of our installed files. And then we would take the configuration, and we ran through each file and applied the configuration. And then afterwards, we notified reload network manager CLI. And so just to speak about the INI file stuff, there's lots of little arguments for it. Anything that modifies a file on the system, one of the handy things about it is they also all have an option to create a backup. So whenever you go and do it, it'll create a date stamp version of the file that it's about to modify before it replaces it with the new one. So if there's a problem, you can go back and find the date stamp version of it. I turned it off here because after I finished setting this up, I had about 2,000 files in there of backups because I'd run this thing so many times trying to get it set up. The other thing, and we'll talk about this in best practices, but you can set variables that carry across your entire playbook. And so you can set things like your Proton VPN user, password. You can set any variables that you can use anywhere else in your playbook, and you can store them in a central location. Ansible also has something called the Ansible Vault. The Ansible Vault is basically that, but encrypted. You give it a password. You can put the password on a file when you run it, or you can pass it in on the command line, and it will decrypt the file so that it can use it. The trick with this is that it doesn't encrypt each individual value. It encrypts the whole file. And so if you've gone through and set all the stuff in a file, you're going to have no idea what's actually in there. And so one of the best practices is to have two files. You have one file that has the actual secret values, and you'll prefix that with vault, whatever your variable is. And then you have another file that would say something like Proton VPN user equals vault Proton VPN user, so that if you look at the other one, that you have a list of all the actual variables that you have access to that's unencrypted, but all the encrypted values live in the other file. And that way you can work with it safely and still have kind of a quick reference. That was just one of the best practice things that I learned from a lot of reading about this over time. And so this was the handler, just the reload network manager CLI, just telling it to run the command line, just run that command. That's it. Simple as that. So yeah, do it once, write it down. Already covered that. But you can do this for anything. So if you need to build things, if you want to use make and install, there's options for that. I'm a giant fanboy for Postgres. It's God's gift to databases. And you're welcome to argue with me on that too and be wrong. But, huh? No. Don't even speak that. He said Foxborough. Anyway, but so there's a module for Postgres called CStore Foreign Data Wrapper. And CStore is basically just a columnar data store extension for Postgres, because Postgres has all sorts of extensions that you can install. Some of them are built in. Some of them you have to do a make and install yourself. And so just for example, on this one, CStore is really helpful if you need to load in a bunch of data and do analysis, because a columnar data store it basically auto-normalizes the data as it goes into it. So it naturally compresses everything down. So I managed to compress about 200 gigabytes worth of data that I needed to go over down to about 20 gigabytes. And I was able to do queries in the span of about 45 minutes that were previously taking me the day to run. And you don't have to index. You don't have to do indexes on any of it either, just because of that. It's not helpful for running as a web backend or anything though, because you can't do standard just one-off inserts and updates. You lose the transactional capability of database to use that. But it's still helpful because you can just have a table over here where you're doing some analysis and you load some data in. But anyway, long and short of that, I was able to do the same thing here. Just check it out, know where the code is, then go to the directory you need to go to, do a make, the make module, register what you're doing, and do the make install. Become will actually switch you to a specific user. If you say become true, it switches you to root. Didn't cover that ahead of time.
So CStore_make is
a
a handle that you created.
Yeah, so we registered that as the output from the previous thing. And so one of the variables that you get from the previous command is changed. And so you can do conditionals here like when, all that. And so when CStore_make is changed, so if it needed to rebuild that, then we'll install it if it's changed. So this is modifying config files. So when I was setting up CStore for Postgres, there's a lot of best practice variables that you might want to change. Things that you might want to change from your default Postgres settings to take better advantage of your machine, take better advantage of parallel processing, gear it more towards running a couple of large queries rather than being able to handle lots of small ones like you might on a web server. And so rather than creating a task and just saying change this variable, then another task and saying change this variable, and another one saying change this variable, we use that handy INI file. We created a little nested list over here with the values that we needed to change. Here's all of the arguments that I wanted to change, their names and their values. And then down here, we tell it change this file, loop through this dictionary that I created up here, and modify the settings. And this backup variable right here is all you need to do to get it to automatically create that timestamp backup of the file. And then when it's done, if anything changed, restart Postgres. And I know it seems like a lot, but it's really straightforward to figure out. I mean, you can get started with Ansible you don't have to start with Ansible thinking, I have to rebuild my entire machine configuration to use this. You can literally say, I have one thing that I need to do on this machine, so I'm going to do it with Ansible instead of SSHing over to it directly and running that command. That's all it takes. You don't have to re-engineer everything to be rebuilt from scratch. You can just say, I need to do this thing. I'm going to create a playbook real quick to do it. I need to gather these files from a particular system. I'm going to create a playbook to do it because I need to run it on 3 other systems too. And you can just incrementally work with what you've got rather than having to rebuild everything from scratch. It's no different than if you were SSHing in machines directly. We have a very, very wonderful genius ops guy at dmarcian. His name's David, and he worked for CenturyLink for about 20 years. And when he got to dmarcian, to say that he had a way of doing things would be an understatement. He's a very sharp guy, but like any of us, we all have our tools and our ways that we like to do things. And so when I told him, we're going to rebuild all these things, and we're doing it with Ansible. He was like, okay. And within about 3 weeks, he was kind of having one of those, I don't know if this is the right job for me moments, because it was so different than what he was used to. Now he tells me almost every day how much he loves this stuff. Mm-hmm. And he's rebuilt our entire infrastructure using Ansible. I mean, we're talking different regions, different data centers of, we replicate our infrastructure in different regions to have regional isolation, because people care about things like GDPR and they don't want data to transfer across countries and oceans and whatnot. And so we replicate all that stuff. And so we replicate our entire infrastructure in each of these different regions that we spin up so that it can have that isolation. And David manages all of it from this. If we need to change something, he now just goes in and modifies a file and then runs it in one region, then runs it in another, and then runs it in another. And it's as simple as that. And we've got huge playbooks now built up to do this. We've got, because it translates really, really well, we've got, we're not using a lot of Docker. We're using Vagrant because we've got a lot of different machine dependencies that are on it for running different machines. And so you can use your Ansible playbooks to configure a Vagrant machine. He's doing that too. And so it's pretty straightforward to keep things consistent across production and development with minor modifications by just having a Vagrant YAML that has a couple differences in it. One of the other things that has been very, very helpful with for the Ansible community is that you can actually use it to configure containers as well. And so I know Docker, Docker's a big hit right now, but there's other types of containers, the LXC, LXD, and if others come from that, you can actually there's actually an Ansible container library where you can say, run this playbook on this container. So instead of investing your infrastructure time into a bunch of different Docker files and then needing to convert those over to something else later on, you can invest your time in Ansible playbooks that you would be able to use to configure bare bones servers, or that you would be able to modify and take out and point specific pieces of it to container technologies as well. And it's very, very helpful that way. But all it is basically you're installing a package or you're modifying a file, grepping around to figure out where a particular variable lives. And the only other thing is, if I run this command, what's different now? And you just start writing that stuff down. You can port it over pretty quickly. So the Ansible Vault, this is kind of what we talked about. You have a vars file and a vault file, and then you'd have something like primary user, Ansible become pass. Ansible become pass is your root password for the machine. So what you need to do to switch to root. If you need to mount drives or something like that, but whatever, your various arguments that you might want to use. I'm a big fan of Quad 9s for my DNS. So that's the one I install because I don't trust Proton VPN's DNS for whatever reason. Well, I'm trusting them with everything else. I don't know why, but it's just me. But you have something like Proton VPN user, and then in the encrypted vault file, the actual user. So you're just referencing the file that's in the vault. But if you looked in this, it's just going to be a blob of gibberish because it's all encrypted. And so here's a sneak peek at this machine's configuration. And so I started out just saying, look, I want to install a few packages. And I started out with just a single task file that says, here's the dependencies that I need to install on my machine. And then after a while, I'd say, all right, now I need to install this other thing. So I'd go through and install it one time, and then I'd uninstall it. And then I'd start translating all the steps that I did to install it into that. And so now I've got things like, had LastPass in here. We were installing Sublime. We needed to install Ruby. Here's the CStore extension. I mean, the pre-task were kind of the base machine setup. Here's the base packages that I need to run these other things. Dell has some libraries that I wanted to install firmware-wise first as well. It'll go down here. It'll install things like Chrome, the Google Cloud SDK, VS Code. You'll get errors within VS Code because it's trying to watch too many files if you put something in there. So you can install a little iNotify role, and you can change the maximum amount of files that your machine can watch. Because if you've run into an error and other people have run into an error, there's probably a Galaxy role out there to take care of it if it's not built into Ansible. But whatever types of libraries you're doing, whether it's Slack or whatever else, each one of these files is basically like a 3-task file, maybe 4 if it's really crazy. Proton VPN one is the biggest one. I think that's about 8. because there were more steps with managing the script and translating the files along the way. But for the most part, creating any of these individual tasks are like that. And I can rebuild, rearrange. I can just comment out a particular library if I want to. And when you're testing, you don't even have to run the entire playbook. You just create a test playbook that has your one file that you're working on in it. You just run that one over and over and over. And then when it's ready, you move that file back into here. And that's it. Any questions that I might or might not be able to answer?
Go back to slide. What was with some of them have become yes and a lot of and stuff you don't.
The become yes just switches you to root.
Questions. I had reached out when I heard Barry was going to do this to IBM's Red Hat guy, and I got us a bunch of different Ansible junk.
Oh, sweet.
So, questions, get a reward.
Nice. Thanks for doing that.
And then I probably got a stack of stickers for everybody to have a sticker.
Well, thanks.
Nice. Well, the become is just switches you to root, and so you can put it on specific tasks themselves.
Okay, so any of those are going to run it through.
Yeah, and
Okay.
what it'll let you do is you can actually go and specify on individual task items that I want become to happen on an individual task, or you can say for this entire playbook, I want it to switch to root for this
So like
for
the
this whole thing.
Postgres one you had become user was Postgres.
Exactly. And so yes or true just switches you to root, and that's all it is. And so are we talking about Alan Valancourt? No. Okay. There's another guy not here in town who does a lot of talks about Ansible. Actually, I think he was working for Red Hat, and he whenever he saw this, he didn't like my setup here. He's like, why do you do the individual one-off becomes? And for me, it was just, the paranoid person in me wants to know every single one of these things that requires me to be root. And so I'm specifying it where it's required. And if it doesn't have to be required, I'm not requiring it.
So the ones that don't have a become are what user?
They just run as you, as your default user.
Is the user that's running the Ansible?
Yes.
Like you would want like specific cron tab things in your cron tab, not in the root cron tab, right?
Yep, exactly.
You would probably specify a different user if you're connected to a remote machine at that point.
Yep.
Unless you had your same user on all the other machines that are connected.
And a lot of times you'll have an Ansible user that has a certain level of permissions or something along those lines. And so it'll vary from machine to machine. On this machine, I'm fine with it doing, whatever it needs to do. But yeah, got I've got my cron jobs on there for the way that this thing sets up. I've got the extra hard drive in here. And so I've got cron jobs that are set up to do rsync backups of the things that I care about, the configuration files that I care about that are getting synced up there periodically, just so that I've got them somewhere. And the Ansible scripts that I've got here are based on knowing that those files exist where they're supposed to be, and then I rerun them. And so it's sort of a big circular thing at this point. But that's just for me. And you can customize anything to whatever your needs are. But if you're starting out simple and you just want to start with something real basic, absolute easiest thing to do is just use it to start building a list of packages that you want to install on your machine. It's a two-line thing of add these packages up there and refresh the cache before I install it, and then go from there.
Question. The Keybase task?
Yeah.
Is that just installing it, or are you also adding it as a new device?
Adding Keybase as a new device?
Adding the machine that Keybase is installed as a new device to your Keybase account?
I'm pretty sure this was just installing it.
Okay.
I don't use Keybase that much. It's one of those things that I installed thinking, hey, I'm going to use this. And there's like 4 people that I know that use it. So,
Yeah. I was just curious if you did any of that, because my mind's already going like, how would I?
So some of them I went that far. The things that I use all the time, I definitely went that far. Like I figured out where all of Slack's cache files were, and I back up on my cache files so that I can restore the cache files. And then whenever you start up Slack for the first time, it's like you're already logged in, and it's got your entire chat history that was on the last time you signed in, and just update the diff. And same thing with any of the images that are on there too. And so you can find a lot of fun things that are in there, but that one I did not, I don't think. But I'll look real quick. Let me see. Let me look real quick here. Where did Jitsi go? Wrong thing. All right, I'm going to stop presenting that real quick. And hi, everybody. And I'm going to share my screen. Unplug this real quick. I'm going to share the entire screen, and then I'm just going to let y'all come over here and see this real quick. So, oops. Yeah. All right, everybody see my entire screen now with the Jitsi thing going? All right, so right up here.
The ones who are on laptop, so.
Y'all can come over here and see it in a second. I was just going to show it to them real quick. So VPN down here. So I've got my little VPN menu here. Here's all the Proton VPNs that were installed. And with this, I can just click on one of these and it'll run.
You said those are the file names.
Those are based on the file names. So I renamed them so they'd be short enough to fit the menu without stretching off. But I've just got the little Proton VPN as the PV. T stands for TCP. U stands for UDP. Then there's the country that it routes through and the country that it comes out of. And then sometimes there are multiples in different countries. So we've got, in case you're curious, routing through Iceland is much faster than routing through Switzerland, just so you know. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And so I'm gonna stop sharing again. I'm gonna plug that back up and show that to everybody here. All right, let's see.
Yeah.
It's
Jitsi.
yeah. Hi. Well, never mind. I'll just flip it around and show you all in a second. Here, over here real quick. Where did my mouse pointer go? Here we go. Hey, everybody.
Hey.
Right there.
Oh,
But yeah, that's it.
Ben, do y'all have any questions?
no. Well, I mean, let me ask around the room. Nelson's got one.
What icon pack are you using?
One more time.
What icon pack are you using in Ubuntu?
Oh gosh, whatever the default was. I haven't gotten that detailed on my
Why is
configuration
that
yet.
not in your Ansible file?
It will be if I change it. Should be. Anything else? Yeah, unfortunately, I haven't gotten into over configuring the display. I kind of go with the default display, and then I'm just interested in making sure that everything I need is there. So. But I will one day. That'll happen.
Excellent presentation, Barry. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody need to talk to the room?
Thank you very much, Barry.
I'm gonna go ahead and hang up on y'all now.